Good afternoon. I am Vanessa Thomas with the 4 o'clock news on the streets, 919 FM, and online, Facebook and YouTube. In the headlines, Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley defends the 2% salary increase offered to public servants, says it's a temporary situation. TNT's public sector wage bill costs $19 billion yearly. A former finance minister says the bill is too high and the government cannot afford that at this time. And internationally, the UK sees basic food prices soar amid growing global crisis. And now the news in detail. Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley is defending the 2% salary increase offered to public servants. At a meeting in Arima last night, Dr. Rowley said even though the country's finances have become better, the government needs to stick within its means and take into consideration the current economic conditions.
So while we say that we have got some improvement in our circumstances, when somebody comes up and asks for X percent, you have to determine now, is that affordable? Because we all know that what's happening in Ukraine could be temporary.
The Prime Minister said the offer given to public servants is reasonable and will not have us going to the International Monetary Fund. He said the government has to maintain a budget and work with what is available. He also noted that this is just a temporary situation.
Very temporary situation driven solely because the Russian supplies have been pushed out of the market as a penalty for the Russian behavior at Ukraine. We have no control over that.
Dr. Rowley says the government's main goal is to make sure people keep their jobs, secondly, have the ability to pay these salaries, and then and only then improve earning capacity. Meanwhile, former Finance Minister Winston Dukuran says Trinidad and Tobago's yearly wage bill is too high. It costs $19 billion yearly to pay all public sector workers, and Mr. Dukuran says despite unions wanting more than what is being offered, the government cannot afford it at this time. Public sector workers and their unions are gearing up for protest on Friday. They are against the 2% being offered on their salaries over an 8-year period. Mr. Dukuran said it's about time a wage policy is developed.
We are now at the very beginning of a return to some kind of uphill road, but there is still a lot that has to be achieved. So in that context, I will think wage restraint will be a necessary requirement.
Mr. Dukuran said when he was finance minister, his proposed 5% wage increase was overruled by the cabinet because the increase would have ran into double-digit figures. Mr. Dukuran said for that, a heavy price was paid.
In my view, we paid a heavy price because it is all those things that led eventually to the collapse of the Petrotrin situation.
The former finance minister said with any negotiations, long-term effects must be considered. He also noted that there is a false notion that wages must go up to match inflation.
It is wrong to say that because inflation goes up, wages must go up. Because when that happens, it's a cycle that goes on and on. What has to go up is growth. When growth increases, then income increases, then wages must increase.
The former central bank governor is maintaining that now is not a good time to increase salaries. And to the CPO and trade unions, Winston Dukuran says sacrifices on both ends have to be made.
Sometimes you have to have tears today in order to have applause tomorrow. Or you wish to have applause today and you'll end up with tears tomorrow.
Internationally, consumers in the UK continue to dig deeper into their pockets for food as global food prices have hit an all-time high in recent months. Consumers are being warned that the cost to eat will get worse. We have more on this Al Jazeera news report.
Trouble at the tills. The price of staple foods has soared in recent months, with as many as 2 in every 5 Britons now buying less to eat. And for the first time in 40 years, inflation, the gradual increase in the cost of goods and services across a year, rose to 9%, with the Governor of the Bank of England warning of apocalyptic food price hikes. Further back the supply chain, the middlemen are trying their best to absorb the rising costs. This is London's biggest wholesale food market, where the industry is experiencing a perfect storm of problems, from the pandemic to Brexit and more recently the war in Ukraine.
The crisis going on in Ukraine, with the floods going on in Spain, the various packaging costs, fuel costs. Brexit hasn't helped as well in terms of all the extra paperwork that has to be done. Who knows what's around the corner? You know, if the war continues, it's going to get worse. The winter's going to get worse. Look at what we're looking at now. You know, the cost of heating, the cost of electricity. It's all going up and up and up.
And that was the 4 o'clock news on the street, 919 FM, and online, Facebook and YouTube. Recapping the headlines, Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley defends the 2% salary increase offered to public servants, says is a temporary situation. TNT's public sector wage bill costs $19 billion yearly. A former finance minister says the bill is too high and the government cannot afford that at this time. And internationally, the UK sees basic food prices soar amid growing global crisis. Do enjoy your afternoon and continue to be safe. I am Vanessa Thomas. Miss Aisha Wells, the Queen of Talk, she's up next.
News from the street. News from the street. 919fm.com.
Good, I'm looking like a real bad.
Are you ready for that boat experience again? The Sea Champion and the Embassy say, book with us for that unforgettable boat ride experience. Sea Champion, leaving from King's Wharf.